Once again, we welcome you to today's webinar. This is Getting the Info You Need, Designing Targeted Surveys and Questionnaires. Joining us today is Dr. Catherine Nameth. Katie is the Education Coordinator for the federally funded Research Center at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her professional responsibilities include educational program design, survey design, and internal evaluation. Her current research is related to higher education, curriculum development, and adult learning that focuses on undergraduate student perceptions of their learning in the scientific research laboratory. Welcome, Katie, and thank you so much for being here today. Would you mind sharing with the audience how you became interested in survey design?
Sure. Thank you, Roxana, and thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone that is attending. I got interested in survey design partially by failing to get the information I needed from the surveys I was doing, and then also throughout my PhD program I learned what I was doing correctly and incorrectly, and so the two kind of grew upon each other, and that is part of what I do for my job, and something I very much enjoy, and I'm happy to chat with you about it today.
Let's get started.
Okay, I will take it from here then. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about designing student surveys for your course or program. And thank you again, Roxana, for the introduction. So I am located at UCLA in the beautiful city of Los Angeles, and I work on campus but in a federally funded research center. All right, so first things first, let's see where in the world you are. If you can please use the tool as Roxana described to place a mark on the map to show us your location. And if you are located somewhere not on the map, please use the chat window and tell us which city and country you are located in. Okay, so a lot of people located in the southwestern region, at least one in Canada. Welcome, neighbor Canada, and a lot also in the Midwest and the East Coast. So welcome all of you. It's nice to see you, at least virtually. Today I'm going to talk about, Roxana, do you have a question?
Yep, really quickly. Kathy, there are some folks who aren't able to hear. And now on my end you sound great, but if there's any way you could please speak up slightly, that'd be great.
Sure, thank you. Let me fix some volume here. Okay, so so let's go to the now that we see where people are in the world, let's go to our next slide and our first poll. So if you can tell us, please, what is your role at your institution? So A for faculty instructor, B for staff, C for student, or D is other. If you select other, please tell us in the chat box what your title is at your institution. Okay, great. So I see that we have a lot of staff people like myself, but also a smattering of other faculty instructors, as well as consultants and research analysts, as well as external evaluators. So before I get to our first question, why survey your students, just a brief overview of the webinar today. So we've done introductions, and then we're going to talk about why survey your students, and then we're going to talk about some student survey content, looking at and improving upon some real-life examples that I've pulled just from things I've seen actually just in the last few months. And then we're going to have Q&A along the way and also at the end of the webinar. So why survey your students? Why would we do this? Whether you're an instructor, an evaluator, either internal or external, a staff member. Well, I think it's because we believe that student perceptions can inform our course or program development. So students are a very important resource in our developing, refining, or redefining a course or program. And also, you can survey your students because we need to collect data we need. The data needed might be for the instructor, for course development, instructor development. It may be for the department. It may be also and/or for accreditation, which most of us, I think, go through about every 10 years or so. And we also collect this data for our funding agencies, those of us that have to be accountable in that way. So what I like to do is, when I'm thinking about a new student survey or refining a student survey, I always think about what do I want to know and why do I want to know it. So I think this is a really important question to start with because it can start us framing what will eventually become a student survey. So I'd like all of you to use the chat window and share one thing that you want to know about your course or program through a student survey. What do you want to know about from students? I see a number of people are typing, so we'll wait for some of the responses to come through. Right, so some people want to know about impacts, outcomes. Is an intervention being successful? Is a program successful, depending on how you define success? You can look at changes of attitudes, right, over the course of semester or longer term. You can ask your students about improvements, possibly to the course or to their experience. And yes, you can also, especially if you're an instructor, you can assess learning outcomes. Perhaps you can compare and contrast your survey results with the syllabus and your stated learning outcomes or the departmental learning outcomes and try to start to triangulate what might be going on, as well as course improvements and many other things. So thank you for participating in the chat window with all of those answers. I'm going to move on now to how I start to answer this question is I make a simple chart. I separate needs from wants. So I think about what type of data I need, what do I need it for, or what do I want it for, and what do I want to use it for. So separating needs from wants and thinking about type of data and data use. So I'm a firm believer in evaluation use. And so I'm always thinking about, well, why? Why am I collecting this information? What will I use it for? So I'll just give you a quick example. In my case, at a federally funded research center, how I would fill out this chart just very briefly. So here I'm looking for 3 types of data: demographic, quantitative, and qualitative. And if you follow along with me reading to from left to right, the demographic data is a federal requirement. So I need that data. The need here outweighs the want, and I use it for the annual report. Similar to the quantitative data that I need, it's also a federal requirement regarding degree completion. So our students and the time it takes them to graduate with either a master's or PhD, and then the rate of completion, and then also the demographics possibly related to the completion. I also need that for the annual report. And then I also collect qualitative data. I don't need that, but it's something that I want. One, I'm personally interested in it, particularly information about our students and our alumni, meaning our former students and postdocs, about their career path. And I use that information for a variety of things: internal evaluation, program development. It provides a really nice supplement to the annual report that is interesting for the annual report. It's not required. It's a little something extra. And also some of this information I can use for our website. So when, if we follow along with the demographic information, we come to our first sample question that I've pooled. So regarding demographic data, I'd like to show you a question and have you use the chat window and identify the problem here with this question. And multiple people are typing right now, so we will just wait a moment to see what they say. Right, there's no opt-out option, and this question, as people have correctly identified, mixes race and ethnicity. So this question will not give you useful data, because if you, like I, are reporting to a federal funder, the better question would look like this. There are 5 categorizations for race according to our federal government, and 1 option for ethnicity. And then I've also added the opt-out option. Someone can prefer to not provide this information. So, so this question, I worked backwards from it. I looked at the federal requirement. I looked at the chart that I need to provide information for the federal government once a year. And then I worked backwards in order to create this survey for our center members, so that I would have correctly categorized information for the report and also for our accountability here. And I see that there's a question in the chat box. I'll go ahead and answer that now. So first I'll read it to you. The question is, when you develop a survey, do you create different versions for different audience targets, the same questions but a different slant? Yes and no, so it depends what the survey is for, but I keep all of my surveys, and I do reuse questions or prompts, and I also learn from previous ones and maybe modify the answer choices or modify the choices as I learn more about survey design or a particular audience. So I definitely develop surveys both broadly and specifically. Okay, so here we have, again, a better example of a survey question we may ask. So when we're talking about student survey content, we can really ask students to provide information in many areas, but I'm going to just give you a taste of each of these 3 during today's webinar. Information about the students themselves, student information about regarding the course, and regarding the instructor. So before we get to our first question that we can look at and then talk about how to improve, I'd like us all to think about ourselves as a case, right? So let's just imagine that we all work for the same program, and here's our case. Our program prepares graduates for entry-level technician positions, and we integrate elements of material science, chemistry, biology, physics, and electronics. And this multidisciplinary design provides graduates with the skills they need to enter a wide range of materials-based industries. Also, our students in our program can enroll part-time or full-time, And they can enroll in one of three pathways. They can choose a certificate pathway, which if they enroll full-time would be less than a year. They can choose a 2-year pathway, or A or B. And the 2-year pathway meaning if they're enrolled full-time. But they have a part-time choice for these three pathway options. And let's all imagine also that we're teaching a first course, the first course in our program, which is an intro course required for all students in all of these pathways. So thinking about that, let's go to a question about enrollment status. And again, here I'm going to show you a question that I pulled from someone else's survey. And we're going to talk about what's the problem here. So again, if we're imagining ourselves teaching in the same program in this multidisciplinary technical course, and students can be enrolled part-time or full-time. And this is our survey question to them. But thinking about our students and our program, what might be a problem with this type of question? So go ahead and use the chat window. Okay, so we're getting some answers in here about what is important to students or what they may or may not know, which is true. But for the purposes of our case, I was thinking more about what kind of information will we get by asking this question. So the information we get is how many students took the survey, and then of those students, how many would be part-time and how many would be full-time. But let's imagine, again, our context, and we want to be specific. We want to be specific to our context, and instead ask students a prompt such as this with multiple options so that we have not just one layer of information, but many layers of information. So if we're teaching a class mixed with part-time and full-time and pathways, now when we ask the class, to give their feedback. So now we know how many of our students took the survey, and then of those, how many are in each pathway, and of those, how many are part-time or how many are full-time. So just by thinking about our context and taking some time to rephrase the question and the prompt and expand upon it a little bit, we're getting a lot more information from our students and that can be much more useful for our course and our program. And I think now, Roxana, it's time for a question break. Do you have any questions, Roxana, or shall I look in the chat window?
No, we have a few questions, but actually we inserted a slide. So if you'd like to continue, we'll go ahead for a few more minutes until the official question break.
Oh, okay, sure. I guess I misunderstood. I thought we were taking one now, but we can definitely take one after the next section. Okay, so also here we're moving on again to our students in our multiple pathway enrollment program, and we're asking them this question: what is your current math level? So again here, take a moment and type in the chat window, what's the problem with asking our students this question? And I see one person is typing something, 2 people are, so we'll just wait for a moment for those to come up. Right, someone said ambiguous. Yeah, it is ambiguous. You know, it's really open to interpretation what these answer choices mean, meaning that we have a student in our class, for example, that came to us directly from high school versus a student who came to us after 15 years in the workforce. They may have different understandings of what is pre-algebra, what is college algebra, what is pre-calc, etc. So again, we can improve upon this by adding in some information from our context. So here, these are the math courses offered at our institution that align with each description. So here we're making it more context specific, but we can make it even more specific if we just take a little bit more time and, for example, ask the students through this prompt. Math skills are an important component of our course, as well as other courses in the college's certificate and degree pathways. Indicate your current math level below. So now we will know the student's current math level, what they have taken, what they have tested out of, what they have passed. So information that possibly your program or your college has, but maybe is in the admissions office or in the academic advisor's office. But if you're the program coordinator or you're the evaluator or you're the instructor, these other layers of information can really help you with teaching the course that you're currently teaching, that it can improve the course next time. So we have, again, a lot more information about our students just by thinking about our context and making a prompt more specific, asking them basically for more information that's related to the program. Is it time for a question break now?
We do have some questions coming in. We'll have the official slide right before the instructor section.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on to going from students to thinking about the course. And here we have a prompt that I found recently. The amount of required reading or other classwork was enough. So let's imagine that we ask this of our students, and the kind of information that they would either agree or disagree with this. So what do you think? How can we improve this prompt? Right, enough, as someone pointed out, is very subjective. So we can improve upon this, right, specifying enough for what. So the amount of required reading was appropriate for this course. So instead of saying enough, you're making it more specific. And also that first prompt, the amount of required reading or other classwork. So we have two things there. We're actually asking about two things. So we want to try to ask for one piece of data at a time. We want to, for this prompt in particular, to focus on reading. Other classwork is open to interpretation. So we may not get useful data from that first prompt. So we can then improve upon it by making it about one thing, required reading, and then making it a little more specific, appropriate for this course. But let's pause a moment and step back a few steps from asking students to agree or disagree with this prompt. And thinking again about required reading, we want to first think about student behavior. And by asking a prefacing question, we can obtain information about specific information on student behavior. So how often did you complete the required weekly reading? Or you can modify for this course depending on your courses where you are. And also defining regularly, semi-regularly, seldom, or never. So now we know, okay, that about half of the students semi-regularly completed the required reading. And now, once we have that information, the follow-up question or prompt to agree or disagree with the amount of required reading was appropriate. Now the specific information on student behavior informs our understanding of their level of agreement with that prompt. So one leads to another. And now it's finally time for the question break. Roxana?
Yes, we have our first question is, how long should a survey be to avoid survey fatigue?
Right. So survey fatigue, if, for those of you that don't know, is people simply getting tired of the survey, either stopping the survey early or survey fatigue may be just becoming very frustrated and randomly marking boxes or writing in things. So how long a survey should be really depends on your context. And so if you want to do a check-in survey, let's say for your students, a survey during your course or program, and you want to do a 10-minute survey, coordinating with the instructor to allow for 15 minutes at the end of class, so students can actually complete that 10-minute survey, because it will take some students 7 minutes, it will take other students the whole 15. Similarly, that would be the in-person option. If you want to do the online option, you need to design your survey and pilot test it with a few of your colleagues, as well as maybe some students, or perhaps a student that has graduated from your class, to see not only what their answers are, but how long it takes them to complete. And then once you have a better idea of how long it takes, then when you introduce the survey, either verbally or online, and you write an introduction to it, you need to be true to that timeline. Because if you tell people 10 minutes and they accept that they will take the survey, they consent to taking the survey, then it really does need to be less than 10 minutes long. So that's a long way of saying it depends on your context and whatever else is going on, either in your classroom if you're doing it in person, or in the general student's life if you're doing an online option. But always definitely be true to however long you say it will be, for it to be that long, or if not shorter. Otherwise, people will say, oh, I'm taking a 10-minute survey and I'm beyond 10 minutes and I'm just going to close it, or I'm just going to mark random answers, because that's not going to be useful information for you.
And our final question, hope I'm asking this correctly, it says, if I have a list of items to be ranked on a survey, what would be a maximum number of items that I should use?
Right, that's a really good question. I'm not sure of the specifics. I'm sure that someone has published on that. Again, depending on your context, I think as far as ranking, I think that for me, at least, it's easier to do that in an online survey. For example, I use SurveyMonkey, where you can actually drag and drop items. So, and it will tell you that, to rank 5 of these 10 items, and you pull the items over. So there's this physical act of completion, and it tells you that, you have 5, or you need 1 more if you only have 4, and we asked you to rank 5. I really don't know. I think that's a really good question, but when I have done surveys in my current context with our current graduate students and postdocs, and I've given them too many choices, and this is for an online survey, I would say people started to tell me there were too many choices when we would do a ranking, when it was much beyond 6 or 7. But again, that's just based on informal feedback I've had from my current stock of students and postdocs.
Great.
But thank you for the question. I'm definitely going to be thinking about that.
We'll move forward for now, and if we have any additional questions, we'll ask them at the very end.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so the last part we're going to highlight is getting student survey information, getting student survey data about instructors, right? So possibly for many of you, for many of us, this is an area fraught with anxiety. You don't know what your students are going to say about you. As the evaluator, perhaps you are reticent on sharing what data you have. So again, we're going to continue in the same vein of I'm going to show you a prompt, and I'd like you to use the chat box to tell me what's the problem with this prompt, again, student perceptions of instructor. So the prompt is, the instructor clearly and thoroughly discussed key topics as stated on the syllabus. All right, someone asked what syllabus, which is a question students have been asking possibly since we had students and syllabi, right? Two different questions. Someone else said clear and thorough should be separated, right? So my point here is to avoid assumptions. Here with this prompt, we're assuming that students have read the syllabus, they remember the syllabus, they've related the syllabus to the course and the instructor. So my point here is avoiding assumptions in your prompts. And so again, if we were to ask them with an agree or disagree scale, we could improve upon this. Well, really what we're asking here is the instructor is knowledgeable in the field and has command of the subject. For me, anyway, that's really what this prompt is asking. So we can get rid of the assumption of bringing the syllabus into it, and we really want to know about the student perceptions of, is the instructor knowledgeable in the field and has command of the subject. By the way, I think the first prompt could be fine if we're talking about faculty development. If you're working in teacher training, instructor development, faculty development, you know, this could be a fine prompt for someone who is analyzing your teaching, giving you feedback, is aware of your syllabus and your context, but not appropriate for the student audience, but possibly for faculty development. But again here, like we did previously, if we're going to go with the prompt, the instructor is knowledgeable in the field and has command of the subject, let's take a moment, take a breath, and back up. Let's take a few steps back, and let's focus on specific past behavior. Let's look at our students' behavior, ask them a few questions before asking them this prompt, so we get some multi-layered information. So we backed up, and we're asking students, how often did you attend class? So obviously this is a summative survey near the end of the course. We can define, as you would for your particular context, what you mean by regularly, semi-regularly, seldom, or never. And we will also ask them, how often did you attend office hours? Now, for both of these, there's no correct answer. I mean, ideally, if we're an administrator, an instructor, we want students to say, oh yes, I always, or I regularly attended class, I regularly attended office hours. But we're asking these questions just to get some points on their behavior. So now we will know how often they attended class, how often they attended office hours, and now we can ask another layer of the question or the prompt. The instructor encouraged students to ask questions. So again, given this context, now that we know about attendance, we can get at their perceptions about the instructor encouraging students to ask questions, right? This might look very different if you have a lot of students saying, yes, I attended class. No, I did not attend office hours. The instructor did not encourage us to ask questions. So that may be informative for you saying, oh, this is an instructor maybe who prefers to ask more questions in office hours, which could be fine. You know, it depends on your department and your context. But you have a lot more useful information this way. And then, if you will, the fourth step in this process then would be putting on the final layer, the instructor is knowledgeable in the field and has command of the subject. So now we have information on student behavior related to student perceptions of the instructor, and we can look at this data in different ways and break it down in different ways. And again, there's more data, but there's also more useful data for the instructor, for program development, for faculty development, for the administrators, possibly for the tenure committee, depending on your context. Now I'm going to just summarize a few points and add a little extra nugget before taking more questions. Sorry about that. Okay, so just to summarize, in designing student surveys, think about what kind of data or feedback do you need versus what you want, and how will it be used. You want to think about your context and design surveys targeted to your particular context. Again, following up on someone's question that they ask, I would recommend, of course, saving all your surveys and reusing them, reusing them, improving upon them, depending on your context. And as we all know, the longer you're somewhere, or the longer you teach a particular group of students, your demographics may change, your program may change. So all of those, the previous information would be useful for you, but you know, to keep your context at the forefront of your mind. You also want to use words and phrases specific to your context and define all terms and acronyms. They also, you know, need to be words and phrases useful for your students to understand. You know, we may not tell students we're doing an evaluation. We may say, we need your feedback. It's still an evaluation, but maybe for students, the feedback is a little more palatable. You want to remember to ask one question or prompt at a time, and also to avoid assumptions in the questions and prompts that you do pose for students. And then also I recommend pilot testing your student surveys. This can ensure clarity, it can help you refine and define, and it gives you an idea of the actual time to completion. So as I mentioned before, I recommend pilot testing with, you know, trying it yourself, trying it with some of your colleagues, maybe previous students, maybe current students who would not be involved in the survey that you're developing. So try to get a little bit more information before you launch it the first time, so you can give them that realistic timeline on how long it is to complete it. So with that, I will conclude my talk, and I'm happy to take your questions, comments, get feedback. Roxana, I think it's back to you now.
Yep, we have several questions for you. First is, when you analyze the survey, what sort of things do you look for to judge things like reliability and validity?
Right. Well, reliability and validity, yeah, these can be really important, again, depending on your context and what you're asking for. So I guess the person's asking, what do I personally look for in reliability and validity, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. I think for me it's about the context and making sure it's context specific, and also making sure that I've taken into account the other machinations that are going on in the context. For example, if I'm serving a group of students and I know that many of those students have been with us for a long time, and maybe they're taking the survey now for the 5th time, you know, I might think about that given when I launched the survey, or maybe you know, I might wonder about if they remember the questions from the year previous. But yeah, so I guess for me, reliability and validity, because my surveys currently are quite small, that I put the context at the forefront of what I do.
Okay, great. Then we have, what do you think about using a neutral response? For example, neither agree or disagree. Would you suggest only 4 items in order to force a choice?
Okay, let me go back here. So here I think, Sandra, is what you're talking about. Let me just take a moment. Would I suggest only 4 items? I personally use what I have on the screen: strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, and strongly disagree. And the reason I do that is because this breaks down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I find that using a 5-point Likert scale can be very useful when we get to the quantitative component, because those numbers also can be correlated with, for example, A, B, C, D, E in grading. Those numbers can be easily converted to the 100-point scale. So that's why I use 5 choices, because we have a 5-point scale there that I think is easier. It's my perception it's easier for people to understand the 5 points. And again, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or A, B, C, D, E, or once you have the results, to convert that to the 100-point scale. And when you present the results, you can say, 68% and things like that. So that's why I do it that way. For my context, I don't see the use in making a forced choice, and I just think that some people are somewhat apathetic about some things, so I give them that choice in the response. It's neither good nor bad. They don't have a comment on it. They can choose the middle one, which would be a 3 on the scale.
Perfect. Then we have, are there, that you know of, metrics in place for judging the quality of a survey?
Are there metrics in place for judging the quality of a survey? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by metrics. I do know, there are some big leaders in the field as far as survey design, particularly mailing surveys, the paper surveys. Almost everyone points to Dillman and his seminal work there. So he, in his book, which I believe is really relied upon by the CDC and other large organizations, he may have something in there I'm not aware of about specific metrics. And then I draw from the literature to support my survey design, which a lot of it is qualitative, and so it would be a different literature for the quality metrics.
Okay, thank you. Then we have, what are some survey questions to obtain information on how students were impacted by a particular class or a new module in class?
Okay, so some survey questions to obtain information on how students were impacted by a particular class or new module in the class. Well, I think impacts needs to be defined. We talk about impacts, and I think many of us mean many different things. I think for a particular class or a new module, first of all, when I design a new survey, I typically search very broadly, possibly sometimes just online, or asking colleagues in other departments for examples of surveys, copies of surveys that they've done, to try to start there and get a sense of maybe where I could start. When you're asking a particular class or a new module, I would say, looking at the goals of the class and the objectives, and also the learning objectives, and using those as the base for then forming your survey. Because, if the class is structured around the goals and objectives, and the students, depending on your department, they may have weekly, biweekly, or just semester-long learning goals. I would start with those, and that will give you an understanding of the context and what exactly you're looking for. And then, of course, these things are tricky because you don't want to ask about it too long after the class has finished. Or maybe you do, but you definitely want to get the student feedback during the new class, maybe immediately after, maybe 3 months, 6 months. It depends what line of thought that you're following. But it needs, again, to be something specific to that class or module. For example, a technical skill, a new idea that was introduced, a new concept. Because if you ask students, how have you been impacted by this class, right? I mean, they could talk about anything. They could talk about a conflict with their lab mate. They could talk about how they really hate doing group projects. They could talk about how they really like the instructor because they come to class on time and the other instructors don't come to class on time. I mean, so you really need to be specific about what impact are you talking about. So for example, if you're teaching a technical skills class and you've introduced a new technical skill, you can ask about that specifically, maybe in an open-ended way and maybe in a closed response way to try to really drill down. But then ideally what you're asking about is then related to the learning objectives and to the broader objective of the course.
And your final question is, with regards to survey response rates, should I be happy with 20% or should I shoot for 100% response?
Yes, I think we all would love 100% response rate. Again, I would point you, I'm a little rusty here on this aspect, but I'd point you to Dillman, who is seminal in the field of designing a survey. And of course, when he started, when he published this book for the first time, I believe was 30 years ago, so surveys were paper and they were in the mail. He wasn't talking about specifically an educational context, but he has a number of tips and tricks and a lot of wonderful advice from a career in the most recent edition of a book, to talk about how to get a higher response rate. And I think, for that type, for like the mailing response, the mail-in response rather, I think it was something like 10% was a really good mail survey, in the mail survey. I think 20% is pretty good, but again, it depends on your population. How many people they are, how much interaction they have. If you're talking, for example, about a cohort in a PhD program, 20% is pretty bad if you're at a student-focused, learning-centered, small group style university, right? But it's really good, perhaps a 20% would be really good in, for example, let's say doing an alumni survey where it was a bit out of the blue and got 20% response rate. And so again, it really goes back to your context. And then as far as improving your response rate, I would point you to Dillman and his tips on that.
Thank you so much, Katie. And speaking of surveys, whether you are joining us live or watching the recorded version of this webinar, we do ask that you please take 1 minute to provide your feedback and suggestions. I'm going to go ahead and launch the survey. And we'll give folks about 1 minute to go ahead and answer these. And so, Katie, while we let them answer the survey, I do have one question that came in for you.
Sure.
All right. It says, in your experience, are there alternatives to surveys that you have used? Any alternatives that you have used to surveys?
Yes, I've done in-person interviews and also conducted live in-person focus groups, meaning some people do focus groups, online through Skype, and I've done interviews via Skype, but I've also done in-person interviews and in-person focus groups. And again, that was either to supplement information that came from an online survey, which was mostly quantitative in nature, and then to supplement that with some qualitative data from an interview or a focus group, or I've used interviews, in-person and Skype interviews in particular, to explore a new area where a new area of research for me. To explore a concept that I thought was, better explored through talking and through conversations and stories rather than through either fixed choice responses or an open-ended prompt.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and give folks just about 5 seconds to finish up. We'll do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you so much for helping us out today. This concludes our webinar for today. Katie, thank you so much for being here. We seem to have lost our screen here. I apologize for that, but thank you for being here, and hope you can join us again for our subsequent webinars. Katie?
Yes.
Thank you again, and hopefully you can join us again.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone. It was nice to meet with you online, and here's my contact information if you'd like to shoot me an email. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.